Καλησπέρα, καλό απόγευμα σε όλους. Είμαι ο Παναγιώτης Μένεγος, είμαι δημοσιογράφος και ραδιοφωνικός παρουσιαστής και για την επόμενη ώρα θα έχω την χαρά, θα έχω την ευκαιρία να συνομιλήσω με έναν τύπο ο οποίος είναι πάντα μέσα για μια καλή, ενδιαφέρουσα και κυρίως παθιασμένη κουβέντα. Έχουμε κάνει αρκετές συνεντεύξεις στο παρελθόν και μπορώ να σας διαβεβαιώσω γι' αυτό. Ο Πολ Μέισον είναι δημοσιογράφος, είναι συγγραφέας, είναι κινηματογραφιστής. Τον καλούν σε διάφορα μέρη του κόσμου να μιλήσει για τις ιδέες του και για το έργο του. Είναι ένας άνθρωπος ο οποίος έχει παρευρεθεί σε διάφορα μέρη σε όλο τον κόσμο, καλύπτοντας πολύ σημαντικά οικονομικά και κοινωνικά και πολιτικά γεγονότα. Έχει βρεθεί στα σημεία που χτυπούσε ο παλμός της Ιφιλίου, όπως ήταν η πλατεία Ταχρήρ κατά τη διάρκεια της Αραβικής Άνοιξης, η πλατεία Ταξίμ, εδώ κοντά μας στην Κωνσταντινούπολη, η Λωρίδα της Γάζας και φυσικά ο Ευρωπαϊκός Νότος κατά τη διάρκεια της οικονομικής κρίσης της περασμένης δεκαετίας. Έχει καλύψει σε μεγάλο βάθος όσα συνέβησαν στην Ισπανία αλλά και στην Ελλάδα. Στη χώρα μας έτσι κι αλλιώς έρχεται από την δεκαετία του 80, έρχεται εδώ και αρκετές δεκαετίες. Και του αρέσει πολύ και το σπεντζοφάι, όπως μου έχει πει στο παρελθόν. Αυτό προσδιορίζεται ως αντιφασίστας, ως ανθρωπιστής, ως ριζοσπάστης σοσιαλδημοκράτης. Έχει γράψει 6 βιβλία. Το τελευταίο του, το Καθαρό, λαμπρό, μέλλον, κυκλοφόρησε πέρυσι από τις εκδόσεις Καστανιώτη. Από εκεί είχε βγει και το προηγούμενό του, το Μετακαπιταλισμός. Και το τελευταίο του, λοιπόν, αυτό το βιβλίο θα είναι το σημείο αναφοράς, θα είναι το σημείο αφετηρίας για την σημερινή μας κουβέντα, που γίνεται στο πλαίσιο των εκδηλώσεων της 17ης Διεθνούς Έκθεσης Βιβλίου Θεσσαλονίκης, η οποία φέτος λόγω της πανδημίας δεν το βάζει κάτω, γίνεται, απλά γίνεται online, όπως τα περισσότερα πράγματα πια στην ζωή μας. Τελειώνοντας με το βιογραφικό και με αυτές τις μικρές συστάσεις για τον Πολ Μέισον, απλά να προσθέσω ότι στο βιογραφικό του μου έκανε ιδιαίτερη εντύπωση ότι έχει δουλέψει και ως σύμβουλος στην τελευταία ταινία Jason Bourne το 2016. Ξέρετε, αυτή την ταινία με πρωταγωνιστή αυτές τις ταινίες με πρωταγωνιστή τον Matt Damon στο ρόλο αυτού του σούπερ πράκτορα, τον οποίο μάλιστα διάβασα ότι ο Πολ τον θεωρεί μάλιστα και incel. Αυτό άκουσα σε μια από τις τελευταίες του συνεντεύξεις. Δηλαδή, incel είναι αυτοί οι λίγο καταπιεσμένοι σεξουαλικά τύποι, οι οποίοι παρακολουθούν τη ζωή μέσα από το σαλόνι τους συνδεδεμένοι στο ίντερνετ. Καλό απόγευμα, Πολ. Έχουμε καιρό να τα πούμε, αλλά κανείς δεν θα μπορούσε να φανταστεί ότι την τελευταία φορά που έχουμε να μιλήσουμε ότι ο κόσμος θα ήταν τελείως διαφορετικός. What's changed in the human behavior besides the empty streets? What are the major changes that you've noticed over the past 8 or 9 months?
Okay, thank you. I think as a social theorist and a political activist, the most obvious thing is everything is frozen. Everything in society has become very atomized. So in the summer, we did have 2 big outbreaks of political protest. So one was the Black Lives Matter protest, which was huge. In the area where I live in South London, there was something like 30,000 black people marched for Black Lives Matter. And the really interesting thing was, because this was during the lockdown, so just as in Athens you had this violence over the 17th of November, we had violence probably just as bad as that. And the interesting thing was that the politicians didn't take part. No political party, Labour included, sent leaders onto Black Lives Matter. I went personally on it, and I could tell that it was a strange feeling to see a mass movement with literally no political leaders. Now, at the same 2 weeks later, we had this reactionary movement, a mobilization. I don't know whether it made the news in Athens, but anti-fascists and black protesters tore down a statue of a guy who made his money from selling slaves in a city called Bristol. And after this, the far right put out a rumor that all statues of imperialists, including Winston Churchill and the founder of the Boy Scouts, Baden-Powell, all these statues were going to be torn down by anti-fascists. So suddenly, large numbers of old white men turned up to defend these statues. But here again, there were no politicians. Apart from, of course, the absolutely, we are fortunate, our fascist groups are tiny, so they were there. So one of the most interesting things has been the complete detachment of civil society protest movements from politics. And politics feels very airless. It feels very like someone sucked the air out of the room. It's a vacuum. And that's the only thing. That's the most interesting thing I think about the present moment.
Would you consider it circumstantial due to the pandemic, or is it a sign of the...
Well, it's also a sign of the fact that the United Kingdom is currently in complete cryogenic deep freeze with regard to what's going to happen on the 1st of January 2021. You know, we are 40 days away from the complete end of our transition period out of Europe, but nobody knows what life will be like afterwards. I think, in other words, politics is unreal and mass politics is unreal. I think that obviously in that situation, on the online world, we're speaking online now. You know, I spend nearly, several hours a day on Zoom calls.
Well, at least we're trying to.
Yeah, but the real problem is that you know, because we've seen all over Europe these anti-lockdown protests where you see the far right coming together with anti-vaccination groups, coming together with other conspiracy theorists. That is born completely online. And as you may know, I wrote a book about the 2011 protests, partly based on my experiences in Athens. And what we saw there was progressive people they had spent 2 years inventing a progressive world online. And then, as Manuel Castells, the sociologist, says, they took the online utopia into the streets in the form of square occupations. What we're seeing now is the right do the same. And so they turn up. They turned up in Trafalgar Square. They turn up, and some people believe that COVID is caused by 5G telecoms. Others believe it's a plot. Others believe it was deliberately released by the Chinese government. And what happens is they meet each other, and they within seconds, they form a composite, higher level conspiracy theory. It's a crazy...
it's an inception of conspiracy theories. An inception of conspiracy theories. Yeah, one conspiracy theory inside the other, inside the other.
Yeah, I described it more like a black hole. So the QAnon conspiracy is like the center, and what happens is it pulls all of the conspiracy theories into it. So now, I don't know again if you see this in Greece, but last year, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, a kind of liberal capitalist, invented this idea that capitalism should reset itself, become green, become circular, that is constant recycling of raw materials, feminist. Actually, it's quite a left liberal document. But what's happened is that the right have taken this and they've turned it into a conspiracy. So when you hear the right say Great Reset, what they mean is that the global elite are going to force everybody to have a vaccine. And what we need is to be able to speak to each other in person, because bullshit is easily detectable in a real human space. But so much of our lives are crushed into this online space.
And more easily spread. And more easily spread in our era. Bullshit. But this is quite a dark description of our times, the one that you just mentioned. But so isn't it quite odd that we have to discuss about a book, your book, which is called Clear Bright Future, in this pandemic circumstance? Is optimism still a thing?
Well, I am certainly optimistic. Because look, the book's title is not ironic. It's based on a quote from Leon Trotsky, where at the absolute depths of his own life in the 1930s, before he was assassinated, his son had just been killed by the GPU. he was in Mexico. He was accused of being a fascist. And he wrote this thing that I still believe, as I believed when I first went into the slums of Odessa to do socialist agitation. I still believe in the clear, bright future of mankind. And I think that all Marxism has to be based on that kind of optimism. Now, for me, the sources of optimism lie in the levels of education. The people alive today are collectively the best educated generation of human beings that has ever lived. We have greater access to technology. If you have any teleological view of history, whether it's Marxism or not, the situation we are in must be close to, or closer to, human liberation than ever before. Even if you only look at GDP per head in the world, it's taken off in the last 50 years in a way that it never did before. So I think there is a logical optimism, but the problem is we are in the book I call it a triple crisis. Crisis of, well, the economic model is busted. The belief in democracy and the rule of law is evaporating. And we have this other problem, which is not so well understood, of what I call algorithmic control. We have lost control of the technologies that are affecting our lives. And the book is an attempt to work out a solution to those problems.
How did that happen? What's your elevator answer?
How did it happen? Okay.
And the other question is, have we surpassed a point of no return?
Yeah.
In this algorithmic surrender?
Right. For me, there would be no crisis of democracy if there was a coherent narrative about the economy. If you are, when you see the riot police on the street beating the KKE in Athens, that's a symbol of a wider problem. The neoliberal elite cannot explain to the mass of people how their lives are ever going to get better. In a way, we are in a worse position than in the early 1930s, because in the early 1930s, John Maynard Keynes said, look, if you do this, borrow money, leave the gold standard, invest in state investment, build railways, build motorways, things will be okay. Nobody among the elite has an alternative to neoliberalism yet. So that's the depth of the economic crisis. Now, I believe, and I argue in the book, that the reason why this so quickly produced an evaporation of belief in democracy is that neoliberalism had created a super fragile ideology. So it's based on a single logical proposition. That is, markets correct themselves. In that sense,
the invisible
the old
hand.
Ideology. Sorry?
The invisible hand of the market.
But not just the invisible hand. It's not just that. It's the self-correcting character of the market. The market is a machine that runs without human intervention. That was the myth of neoliberalism. Now, as soon as it's gone, first, in order for that myth to become pervasive, and we all redesigned ourselves to adapt to it, it had to smash all other myths. The myth of socialism, the myth of welfareism, even the myth of progressive liberalism. You remember that our Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, once said, there is no such thing as society, only individuals. Now, okay, fine, they won, they defeated my dad's generation, the coal miners, defeated, okay? All you have is the belief in the market, and then the market, boom, it blows up. So you then ask, well, what explains the world? And neoliberalism's inability to answer that then opens the space for all the things you saw in Greece during the rise of Golden Dawn, and the other right-wing parties as well. Let's remember them. all the things we're seeing now in America with Trump, Bolsonaro in Brazil. I would even put into this category what is happening in India with the BJP party. What you're seeing
would you put Boris into that lot?
With what?
Would you put Boris Johnson in this line?
Yes, but I think let's come to the categories, because in the book, my next book actually is a book about the far right and the right and their interjection. But yes, Boris Johnson, if you want to use the Gramscian analogy of we're into an interregnum, and it's many morbid symptoms, said Gramsci, are coming out. Boris Johnson is definitely one of them. So, but in the book, I was just looking back at one of the things I wrote in the book, and it says, I warned that one of the historians of fascism, a left historian called Hans Mommsen, wrote about fascism that it experienced cumulative radicalization. So that means it does something, and then that thing doesn't work, and so it does something more radical. I think what we're seeing is the interaction now of the economic crisis, the evaporation of democratic values, and then the technological control problem. Every iteration of it is worse. You know, for example, since I wrote the book, I started writing the book in early 2017. The first chapter of it is about the Trump inauguration. Mm-hmm. But since I wrote the book, traffic to websites that amplify disinformation in America is up 350%. So it's this cumulative radicalization. And that's why I was so insistent in the book to place the question of who controls social technologies right at the center of what the left and social democracy and liberalism in civil society should be fighting for against this new right.
You've suggested in your book small acts of defiance against machine logic in daily life. Could you provide us some examples?
Yes. Okay. Well, let me give you an example of the craziness of machine logic. Okay. In Britain, there is we don't have kiosks. So we have shops that sell newspapers and cigarettes, a bit like kiosks. It's called W.H. Smith. So W.H. Smith used to have this tactic. Whenever you go, and every member of staff had to do it, it was an instruction. Whenever you go to pay, they try to sell you a chocolate bar. Nobody wants these chocolate bars. Everybody is on a diet. It's just a bizarre thing. Next, they sacked all the workers. They replaced you can go into a really big branch of this store now, which should have 5 or 6 people on the till. Instead, you are confronted by automatic machines, and you have to scan your own things. And the craziest thing is, at the end, the machine offers to sell you the same chocolate bar. It's absolutely bizarre. Now, just the thing to do, what I do is I refuse to use machines. Of course, sometimes we need automated machines. I think it's many of my friends and neighbors in the place I live refuse to use those automated machines, and they will queue for a long time. They're not angry, they're not getting frustrated against a single person, but they just don't want to do the job that someone else could do themselves. But that's a tiny and minuscule example. I think we need to recognize what algorithmic control is. I'm quite prepared to accept going through an algorithm at an airport so that when I go on a plane, there's a very good chance that nobody is carrying a gun or a bomb. So I go through an algorithmic process to find out who everybody is, and if I am a terrorist or if I'm not a terrorist. I'm happy with that. What I don't want is every interaction with a news organization or online shopping like Amazon or Facebook, everything. I don't want my behavior to be monitored and controlled in that way. And look, I want the right to see what Facebook is trying to do to me. If I enter a shopping mall, I kind of know they want me to buy things. And so if it's a big shopping mall, I can understand, yeah, to get to the clothes store, I have to go past an ice cream store. So then maybe I buy an ice cream. I can understand. I understand as well that above me is closed circuit TV, that I am on camera all the time. That's why in our country, a lot of black people and Asian people love to shop at shopping malls because they feel safe. Fine. But if I enter an online store, I don't want that online store to be able to do things to me without I know what they are. So the fight for algorithmic control, I think, is one of the new frontiers of human rights. And I was really keen in the book to try and bring the debates that we are having in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, the ethics of AI, into the popular sphere, where most people don't even know the first question that is being asked in that debate.
What's that first question?
Well, you know, everybody probably should know it. It's the trolley problem. If I am in a train, or a train is coming, there are two tracks. One has one person, another has 5 people on the track. If you can stop it, what do you do? Or if by doing nothing 5 people die, by switching the points only 1 person dies, do you do it? It's a classic ethics problem.
The AI ethics classic dilemma. Yeah, but
the problem is that artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotization are posing and answering much more complicated ethical questions already without any human intervention.
But someone would argue that the world is transforming to a better place, and technology has played the most vital role in that. I mean, where do we draw the line between technophobia or even ludism and real progress?
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. And my book is overtly pro technological advance. I see the mass automation of the world as the route to human liberation. I want there to be so much leisure time and so little work on this planet that human society changes radically and fundamentally. So I want there to be the rapid automation of the world, but the question is in whose interest. We are at the moment trading away control in order to get automation. Look during the lockdown, Britain has a very a very big Amazon operation. Amazon's turnover has increased by 30% in the lockdown. For people in my family who are at risk, I have people in my family who are very at risk if they get COVID. They would be in a serious trouble. They order everything on Amazon. That's great. But in return, we're giving Amazon free knowledge, which it can data mine, it can analyze, it can synthesize, it can create new business models, and we do it without really knowing or consenting. And so I think that civil society has to, in the 21st century, come forward with a far more intelligent bargaining position, and indeed push its own right to control technology right into the space of where the tech giants currently are.
Let's get back a little bit to the subtitle of your book. Clear, Bright Future, a radical defense of the human being. That is to say?
Well, as I've been on the left my entire adult life, and from the 1970s, mid-1970s, when I was a teenager, I became involved in politics. I was kind of aware that there are two Marxisms. One that sees human history as the product of individual human beings' actions, albeit in conditions they can't control. And the other one, which was very popular when I was at university, sees history as a machine and human beings as the machine's tool. And I'm sorry to say, for 40 or 50 years, 40 years, I thought that these two kinds of Marxism could coexist with each other, and the differences between them were a secondary question. So I'm talking here about the works of Louis Althusser, and then after that you get postmodernism on the anti-humanist side, and on the humanist side you get this tradition quite strong in Britain, coming from Edward Thompson, the historian, a humanist Marxism, in America represented by Raya Dunayevskaya. I thought, well, that's a kind of niche argument. I became convinced as I saw how rapidly technological control was taking over that Marxism had to confront this basic dilemma. Is this a theory of human freedom, or is it not? Mm-hmm. And if it is not, and history is just a machine, as Althusser said,
the train dilemma of Marxism.
Yeah, well, the reason we have to conduct a radical defense of the human being is because the whole of techno-capitalism is trying to dehumanize us. And here's the problem: there is part of the left that is profoundly anti-humanist, and so it will argue things like some people have argued with me, quite progressive people. It's okay if China introduces a massive social control system based on technology and surveillance, because Chinese people don't have the same attachment to freedom as we in the West. That our desire for human freedom is a social construction, just as the same as our concept of humanity is. We're just a bag of bones and genes, and our outside environment affects the way we think. You will know that in neuroscience, it's very popular to say free will is impossible because of the way that we anticipate things we're going to do at a physical level, the way our neurosystem works. If you think about it, we are surrounded by theoretical anti-humanism, and my big fear always was, going right back to the 10 years ago, that unless a radical left with a humanist and a democratic, an inclusive and internationalist program could lead this new generation, something else will become really popular, and that is what I call retro-Stalinism. The nostalgia, young people swapping in our country, jokes about the Gulag, saying the Gulag, maybe it didn't exist, people idolizing Joseph Stalin. I knew that would come back because so much of modern academic Marxism is anti-humanist. And so that's the kind of new fight I want to have within the left. And yes, well, that fight is going on because there is a quite sharp separation between those of us who believe in that Marxism is a form of radical humanism and the others who don't.
Which are the major changes you expect to see in the post-COVID-19 world? Which are your major concerns? If there will be a trace of authoritarianism, if this financial crisis will be perennial?
Well, first of all, I think, fortunately, let's hope so, that the vaccine comes and that this turns out to be a 2 to 3 year crisis. Let's hope that happens. If it does, then it has left some countries really badly impaired in terms of debt. Britain has, I think from memory, £2 trillion of debt, and this year it will borrow probably 400 billion. So the entire debt accumulated since the days of William Shakespeare, that's the 2 trillion. We're now in 1 year, we're accumulating almost a quarter of that. So what does that do? It limits the room for maneuver of the government if we get a new crisis. And in countries like yours, which are part of the Eurozone, where you don't have monetary sovereignty, it puts you even more under the slavery of Brussels and Frankfurt, as you were in 2015. So I think that there are time bombs happening with debt in the future, but that's not the big problem. For me, the biggest problem is that this inevitably strengthens the role of nation states in the world. And if all nation states were ruled by nice people, that would be fine. But as you know, we have the emergence of a great power politics right now. So Russia with Putin, China with Xi Jinping, Trump's America, they are all tearing at the fabric of the multilateral global system. And so it is logical for people to say, the only thing that can defend me against COVID-19 is not the European Union or the World Trade Organization or Davos, okay? It's my national government. Now, in a way that's good because it means that we will demand democratic solutions. But I also think it creates an impetus towards economic nationalism that is negative. We've already touched on the other negative, which is with the absence of a real physical civil society, everything bad online is amplified much more easily.
Would you consider Brexit as an early example of this economic nationalism?
Well, yes. I mean, I think if there could have been a form of Brexit that was left-wing, that kept Britain close to Europe, that didn't victimize economic migrants from Europe, East Europeans, the thousands of Greeks who work in London, if that could have happened, it would have been a good idea, because the British economy is different than the Eurozone, and like if Britain were like Norway, there would be no huge tragedy for me. The problem is Brexit became one of the first, actually, it's in the last decade, it was one of the first steps towards economic nationalism. It was driven largely by right-wing nationalists, and here's the problem. Going back to this problem of cumulative radicalization, they've got Brexit. Are they happy? No, they're not. They're very unhappy. Not because of the economic catastrophe that's going to happen if we don't get a deal, but they now have another problem. They have the problem of Black Lives Matter. And all the same people who hated the European Union now hate Black Lives Matter. It's whatever you give them, their anger doesn't go away. Before it was Islam. So I think that what worries me about COVID-19 is that we have parties in Europe, social democrats, leftists, green parties, which are all we've got, but they're very designed they're attuned to a period of social peace, where everybody plays by the rules. You can see it in America too with Biden. He's saying to Trump, look, the rules say you should be leaving the White House. Trump's saying, no, get on the streets and protest. We don't have left or liberal parties that understand how to play in that position. And I will say that for all my criticisms of Syriza during the 2015 period, where, as you know, I had the privilege to sometimes go into Komanduru and to the Prime Minister's office to see what was going on. I think the one thing I would say about Syriza at that time is that it did have an understanding of how to act in a crisis. I think it did some wrong things, But believe me, we are surrounded in Europe by people who wouldn't know the first thing to do in a crisis. And that is what worries me the most.
We'll get back to Greek politics at the end of our conversation, but I wanted to ask about these people that they're not happy, these people that voted for Brexit, that voted for Trump. What can we say to these people? Because, I mean, they're losing their jobs, they're losing their identities, they're losing every passion, every possible point of reference to the world already known to them. It seems that every possible attempt to convince them not to surrender at demagogy, at hatred, has failed. What can we say to these people?
Yeah, okay, I think we need to separate two things. All the evidence about Trump and Trump's supporters, and it's true here in Britain, with the supporters of Johnson, and we had this right-wing party, the Brexit Party, which was a little bit like Anel, to be honest. Yeah, it was. It had sort of left. It had some left rhetoric as well as some right rhetoric, but it was essentially a front for the far right. In general, these are not the poorest people. The people who voted for Trump weren't the poorest people. The under 50,000 a year households in America overwhelmingly voted for Biden. So I think we need to realize, but there is a phenomenon, as you described, which is that, the classic man who does a manual job, who didn't go to university. The structure of modern capitalism doesn't allow them to advance. They are stuck at the bottom, and this is the mismatch. I went on a far-right demonstration undercover this year in London, and I could see it really clearly. What they've lost isn't really jobs and wages, is status. Because now they have to compete for the same jobs on the same wages as black and Asian people and migrants. And in their minds,
they've lost the supremacy.
Yeah. White supremacy at its most extreme. W.E.B. Du Bois, the black American sociologist, called it the wages of whiteness. But it's the insecurity when it's not at its extreme. Okay, so what we need is a counter narrative. And I think that, there's been a lot of discussion on the left. What the liberals hate the most is the idea of left populism. And they look at Syriza, they look at Unidas Podemos in Spain, and they look at the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the squad in the Democratic Party, and they really hate that because they call it left populism. Chantal Mouffe, the theorist, wrote a book called We Need Left Populism, for a left populism. Now, I don't think we've tried left populism, because real left populism crosses over to those people. It says, we can solve the problem you have in a better way. No, I don't think we can give any.
Haven't we tried left populism in South America?
Yes, and yes, I think we have. But where it works the best, Bolivia, is where, I mean, there are different conditions. I went to Bolivia and I interviewed Evo Morales, and look, even there he got overthrown, but they fought back, and I think that's very much down to the social strength of the indigenous people, the Quechua and Aymara people of Bolivia. Excuse me. I think in other countries, Ecuador, for example, it got overthrown. It didn't deliver. It was, as well, I had some contact with the Ecuadorian government under Correa, and it was, in many ways, quite bureaucratic. It was not as populist as you think it was. I think, as I said before, Syriza, in parts, at the times, I remember these huge meetings in outskirts of Athens with all sections of society there. Syriza did some of that. Our problem in Britain is we had in the shape of Corbyn, someone who I think wanted to do it but didn't really know how, and he was surrounded in his party by people who hated him and wanted to sabotage him. And so I still think that the way to deal with that, I mean, remember, Trump got 7 million extra votes. So whatever the Democrats are doing didn't work. We need almost like a multi-layered social counteroffensive around a different narrative. And that narrative has to come from the struggles of those people themselves. Like, if you go to a community like in West Virginia, the ex-mining communities, there are progressive people, but the way they want the left to operate is very different than the way the urban, city, progressive left operates. We need to build a movement in which there can be two kinds of left, and that's a very difficult thing to do.
That somehow answers my next question, but I will put it. If the new left rhetoric, as you are describing it for a while, I want to ask if it is wasted defending identity politics and applying small-scale cancel culture. I mean, if it wastes its power on conducting these subjects. And not the bigger picture as you described it earlier.
The audio is a bit indistinct. Could you do it slower, please?
Okay. You've answered it, but I wanted to ask if the new left answer these global questions, because many people argue that new left is wasted defending identity politics and applying small-scale cancel culture. What's your point on that?
On the small-scale tactics or non-hierarchical network tactics, I think that they are still useful, and they go in waves. They go in several iterations. What worked in 2011 doesn't work today. But I do think that building the small-scale alternatives is an important thing to do. But you've got to be building them in real communities. So, you know, there's lots of places where someone took over an art gallery, like in Madrid, and they do some open source programming. Yeah, it's great. But what you should really be doing is open a center in the worst, shittiest, slummy area of the city and start feeding people. That's what I think you should put the priority. As regards so that was one part of the question, wasn't it? Whether the horizontal stuff works. Identity politics. Right, look. I think I don't criticize identity politics because I see the collapse of solidarity in class terms, which happened in my lifetime in the working class community I come from, as it's a one-way journey. It's anybody who thinks like kind of the old worker culture will suddenly come back. It's just dreaming. If you go to Piraeus, you will still find those dock workers, often mobilized by KKE or sometimes Syriza. They live that life. Okay, good, and I'm so glad that they exist. But it doesn't replicate itself elsewhere. So for me, identity politics is good because it creates like a nucleus. It creates something that you want to defend. Somebody who says, stay out of my space, don't harass me, don't oppress me. That's like a little one-person guerrilla movement. The problem is, first of all, there's got to be a narrative that brings them together, because what's now happening is that the narratives, you know, idealistic, postmodernistic narratives that try and explain oppression in terms of person-to-person interaction. So because I'm white and male, I must be oppressing you if you're Asian and female. Okay, maybe I am. But you cannot then go from that to because I'm white and male, if I attack Xi Jinping for incarcerating 1 million Uyghurs and being racist. But this is where the dialogue is actually going. So I think we need to move above identity politics to define what the left is. And then having done that, there's one more thing. Unfortunately, it's a really unfortunate thing. But imagine this. In the 1930s, where we defeated fascism, we created popular fronts. The popular fronts were an alliance between liberalism and the left, or radical republicanism and the left. In those popular fronts, like it or not, the only reason they existed is because the left took all its ideals, the dictatorship of the proletariat, not singing the national anthem, and they put them in a box marked for later. Because right now, we need to construct an alliance that is big enough to defeat the right. And I would include that in Greece. I think this new democracy government, on paper, it's doing some things that, like jailing Golden Dawn. Fine, they're now taking the credit for jailing Golden Dawn. Well, we know the story. That's bullshit. We know that isn't the real story. But, okay, in reality, you are seeing police crackdowns. You're seeing the clearance of Exarchia. You're seeing lots of repressive activity against migrants. You're seeing foreign far-right people going to Evros to police the border. So in the next election, the Greek people need something that gets rid of Mitsotakis. And whatever that thing is, you might not like it, but we have to construct it. In Britain, we're actually lucky. We can get rid of Boris Johnson in 2024 with a Labour Party and a progressive national party in Scotland called the SNP. We can do it. But I really think the 2020s are a vital decade, because while we're deciding whether whether we're prepared to compromise on this or that issue of identity politics, the right are destroying the planet, because we only have, the clock is ticking. We don't have forever to solve the problem of climate change.
Yeah, but just for the record, I'd like to mention that there is some 39% of the Greek people that voted New Democracy just a year ago. So yeah, maybe this is the mandate.
Well, they have a mandate. Yeah, they have a mandate, and your lovely electoral law that gives them an extra 50 seats give them okay. Syriza used that as well. No, what I'm saying is, yeah, they have a mandate because the left didn't win an argument, and that's now history. You can't reverse into it. We have to go forward towards something. I also think that you're in a different situation. I mean, like it or not, there is a geopolitical fault line, and Greece is now sitting on it with Erdogan. We are seeing a guy who, when I was in Turkey in 2013 during the Gezi Park uprising, he came close really to losing it. The state didn't have a very powerful grip on society at that moment. Now, the AK Party state is really strong in the sense of, lots of journalists are in jail, HDP leaders are in jail, lots in exile, and now he's got the backing of the Russians to start throwing weight around in the Aegean and in the Mediterranean around Cyprus, and that's a real issue. So much as I would love to go back to 2015, that dynamic has gone, and the next dynamic, I know that it's very difficult for the anti-systemic left in Greece. The next dynamic has got to be, what do we do about that as well?
I can see that you're still keeping an eye on Greek politics. Have you ever thought that during 2014 or 15, you seem like an undercover cop that got too sympathetic with the ones that he surveilled?
What do you mean?
I mean that you were here, that you got too passionate, that you had this documentary. This is a coup. Yeah, that you reported on the Greek situation. That you fought on social media, on Twitter.
I tried. Look, as a journalist, you either do one job, which is to be impartial and you work for public service, or you do a job which is to say, well, here's my beliefs and here's what I'm going to pursue. I think I quit from the Channel 4 where I worked exactly because of that. I didn't want to go on doing impartial journalism because I could see that, you know, my own country was about to go down the tubes because of Brexit. I wanted to be able to intervene in that debate. And the experience of Greece, and to be honest, the experience of the Gaza war convinced me that journalism, whilst it's brilliant, and I completely support the alternative and left-wing media in Greece, they do a fantastic job. And whenever I can, I contribute to them for free. And, you know, I love to do that. But I think journalism alone at this stage doesn't change history, and I wanted to be able to do a different kind of journalism that was committed and that was trying to create this narrative that we see. I have to say, of course, my family has a long it has a long engagement with Greece going back to the 1980s, and so when I saw the Papandreou government going bust, I was in Davos, and I saw Papandreou and Papa Constantinou standing there like rabbits in the headlight. It was an English phrase we say. They were literally rabbits in the headlight. They didn't know what to do. And that was 2010. And I said to my friends, this is it. These guys, because I know Greece, Greece will not stand up for the level of austerity that these guys want to impose on it. And so I began to engage more at that point. And then 2011 happened, and you know, the occupation of the squares. I see it as one of the most interesting and inspiring things that I've ever covered. I'd say as well about the Gaza coverage.
But that was the brief description on how Greece became the big story of the 2010s.
Go on.
Yeah. What happened to your Bouzouki lessons?
I can't find anybody to teach me. I don't play Bouzouki. I have a baglamas, the little one. Yeah.
Because I've read somewhere that and I quote you, that I've just started learning to play the Bouzouki, but you really need a beer gut to prop it up on.
This is exactly what the one guy who gave me a lesson said. You really need to drink a lot of beer so it will sit here. Yeah, I do have a little bit of a beer gut, but not big enough. But the main problem is that I have to learn the dromos, and it's the Byzantine music, because I studied music, so I know about Byzantine modes. But getting your soul to feel it, if you're from a Anglo-Saxon background, is quite difficult. But yeah, I will get there one day.
Okay, final question. Let's get back to the prologue, to your brief introduction. Why did you call Jason Bourne an incel?
Jason Bourne an incel. Okay.
You've worked as a consultant to the latest Jason Bourne movie.
Yeah, well, the one that was filmed in Athens.
Okay.
You're not supposed to say what you did on a Hollywood movie, but
it was filmed in Tenerife.
Yeah. Sorry, it was filmed in Tenerife, but you know there's a riot in Exarchia. Okay. So basically, I know how riots in Exarchia happen, and there is a riot in Exarchia in the film. I'm not responsible for the crazy moment where Bourne goes through the crowd with a gun, because that obviously is a bit crazy. But no, look, it's interesting, isn't it, that in that movie, what the makers of it, Paul Greengrass, were trying to do was to encapsulate the new problems of society. If you think about it, there is a figure a bit like Assange in that, you know, a kind of a hacker, or Edward Snowden, and there is the problem of massive social unrest, in which, and then you've got the other problem of algorithmic control. You've got the CIA, as Bourne is moving through Exarchia, they can predict his moves because they know everything about him algorithmically. For me, that what the filmmakers of that movie we're trying to do was a really interesting thing. But we love our action movies to be simple, and so it probably went a bit above the heads of a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Bourne doesn't have a girlfriend. It's really interesting. James Bond, poor old Sean Connery, has just died. He got plenty of.
I hate to admit it, but I'm still a James Bond guy. He really stuck to the Cold War imperialistic
But isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that even a film made by relatively, by progressive people, greengrassers and anti-fascists, that Bourne basically is an incel. He shows no interest in women in any of the films, and why do we do this? What I'm trying to get to in the book is, why are we creating actually superheroes, Nietzschean superheroes who are not humans as our role model? If you think about it as well, Bourne is a Nietzschean. Friedrich Nietzsche was in favor of incelibacy, of celibacy rather, and had the same attitude to violence. And I think it's an interesting social symptom of the way storytelling has moved in this epic and mythological direction, rather than in the direction of the real, the human being. And in all my storytelling, I still make films. I try to tell the story of real human beings. And I think this is one of the most revolutionary things you can do at a time when Hollywood is pushing everything towards the superhuman.
Why do we need superheroes? I'm keeping that as the starting point of our next meeting. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
And thank you for using the English. Your English is perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Αυτός ήταν ο Paul Mason, ο συγγραφέας του βιβλίου «Καθαρό, λαμπρό, μέλλον», που κυκλοφορεί από τις εκδόσεις Καστανιώτη. Την προηγούμενη ώρα ελπίζω ότι είχαμε μια αρκετά ενδιαφέρουσα κουβέντα και μας συγχωρείτε και για τα προβλήματα που υπήρχαν στην αρχή με την μετάφραση. Ελπίζω ότι λύθηκαν και την απολαύσατε κι εσείς. Μπορείτε να τη δείτε έτσι κι αλλιώς και στην σελίδα στα social media, στο Facebook της Διεθνούς Έκθεσης Βιβλίου της Θεσσαλονίκης, αλλά και στο thessalonikibookfair.gr. Ήμουν ο Παναγιώτης Μένεγος, κάναμε παρέα την προηγούμενη ώρα μαζί με τον Paul Mason. Ευχαριστώ πολύ που μας παρακολουθήσατε. Γεια χαρά.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Thank you.